Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So today we're going to talk about the upcoming TLC public hearing, which has been in the news quite a bit. And so I know we go long form, but I have actually made a point specifically to try to do this video in less than 20 minutes. Maybe it's going to be between 20 and 30 minutes, but less than 20 minutes because uh, I think for this, it can, I could do a 8-hour podcast on this. I know that sounds, no one's going to watch that, but there's a lot of complications. I just want to simplify it ahead of that meeting so people understand, what this meeting is about, what the new rules are. So, okay, given that timeline, let's get right into it. So, okay. So what we do is we write our newsletter article and then we embed this video that we're doing right now into the newsletter article. So the title of the article is Can NYC Stop Uber and Lyft Lockouts? Much anticipated NYC TLC public hearing this Wednesday is already sparking intense reactions among industry stakeholders. We simplify the discussion and share our take. So just 2 bullet points. What many NYC TLC drivers and other industry stakeholders do not understand complex driver pay rules. This is a regulatory failure. You could also say it's a failure by the media to make it simple. That includes us. We've tried our best to make it simple, but hopefully this time around we can make it super simple. And so the second bullet point is just a very simple one. What is a fair compensation for an NYC TLC driver, and how is that determined? Basically, that's really what this is about, Okay. The goal of today's article is simplicity. Our video over the one we're doing right now provides more details but remains concise. At least that's the goal. We've realized that TLC's driver pay formula has become overly complex, making it difficult for most industry stakeholders to understand. While we've spent considerable time simplifying and explaining the technicalities, diving into minutiae at this point isn't useful to many of our readers. Details matter, but sometimes they distract. This article is specifically for drivers and others who plan to testify at the upcoming public hearing on driver pay. There's a lot of noise surrounding what's being proposed and its potential impacts. And so that's the detail of the hearings this Wednesday, 10 a.m., how you sign up. And so we say, in our view, the TLC is aiming to achieve 2 primary objectives in this hearing. The TLC is prevent Uber and Lyft from imposing driver access restrictions known as lockouts and ensure the driver pay formula accurately reflects the cost of doing business. Okay. So first principles, let's return to first principles. What is this really about? NYC, through the TLC, aims to ensure that for hire transportation, TLC drivers are fairly compensated and not subjected to abusive labor practices. We believe everyone can agree that these are uncontroversial and noble goals. However, the debate begins when defining what is fair or abusive. What constitutes fair compensation for an NYC TLC driver? Should drivers earn $100 an hour, 50, 40, $30 an hour? What is truly fair? And just as importantly, what are passengers willing to pay for? Fairness can be quantified. The first step is determining the cost of doing business, which provides a foundation for discussing what fair compensation should look like. Okay, so just very simply, like, this is what this is all about, honestly. It's like, what is the fair compensation that Uber and Lyft has to pay TLC drivers? That's what, all of the technicalities are important, but like, that's what we're trying to solve for. Are drivers being compensated fairly, and are they being treated fairly? If you're being compensated fairly, but like, you're sweating that, Uber's going to deactivate you all the time unjustly, that's also not right. So it's a mix of that. Fair compensation, fair treatment. And now, fair is a very subjective word. So, okay, simple example. If an NYC TLC driver's typical operating cost is $30,000 per year, let's say, vehicle and just running the business gas or waiting for EV charging and yada, yada, yada per year, and they drive an average of 30,000 miles annually, a compensation metric can be established based on a per mile rate. So $30,000 vehicle operating cost divided by 30,000 miles. So that's a metric that can be created per mile, $1 per mile. Like, that's a cost metric. If the minimum wage in NYC is $16.50 per hour, we can use that figure to establish another compensation metric, the per minute rate. So $16.50 per hour over 60 minutes, a little less than 30 cents. Now, to be clear, we're not saying that driving TLC is a minimum wage job. Rather, we're emphasizing that the TLC can use these metrics to establish minimum pay rates for independent contractors who have the flexibility to work when and where they choose. If a driver sits in their vehicle and directs every Uber and Lyft ping, it wouldn't be reasonable to require the companies to pay them. After all, the driver chose not to work despite having the opportunity. We think everyone can agree with that. That brings us to James A. Parrott's published uh, newly published driver expense report. We'll provide the link for everything here and where to find this directly, which serves as the key foundation for TLC's determination of minimum pay rates. Okay, what we're saying is everybody understands that TLC drivers are compensated on a per mile and per minute rate. Easy enough to understand, but how do you even start formulating the minimums? I use the NYC minimum wage here, not to imply that TLC driving is a minimum wage job, but it's like a foundation upon which to build, to determine a wage rate. Let's say you think it's should be 25% higher, then build on that foundation. But that's the basic. So per mile per minute rate, that's how we think about it. Okay. So basically what happened is the TLC hired this professor who also was involved in the other report that focused on estimating the per mile rate, like estimating the operating costs, which, is a key metric in the compensation. So Professor James Parrott of the Center of New York City for New York City Affairs at the New School was selected and presumably paid by the TLC to analyze driver expenses and help determine whether the NYC pay formula needs adjustment. Below, we've included an exhibit from his report showing how he estimates the per mile rate for an NYC TLC driver who either owns or rents a gas-powered internal combustion engine ICE vehicle. He also conducts a similar analysis for electric vehicles, EVs, factoring in wait time. So I'm not going to go over every single line item here, obviously, but it's like, with gas, average gas price, down payment, monthly payment, all of these things. He gets to, I mean, randomly it adds up to 30,000, but like he basically gets to if a TLC driver owns a vehicle, and I guess he estimates on average they do 32,500 miles. This is for Uber and Lyft HV drivers in New York. He says it's about 91.4 cents per mile. That's the vehicle per mile cost. If they rent a TLC plated car, it's higher. It's $1.13 a mile. And so, and you can go over the details, but you get it. He's like breaking it down. Okay. So to determine the final per mile rate, he believes the TLC should use Parrott assigns different weights based on the proportion of drivers who own or rent an ICE vehicle or an EV. In his analysis, he estimates that approximately 30% of drivers rent a TLC plated ICE vehicle. So he applies a weight of 0.292, roughly 30%. All of these weights are combined, resulting in a finally per mile rate factor. We'll explain what factor means later, that the TLC is proposing. And that gets it to 88 cents per mile. This represents an 11.4 increase over the current rate. So basically what I'm saying is that he determined, okay, if you own a car, it's 91.4 cents. If you rent a car, it's $1.13. If you own an EV, it's 91.4 cents. If you rent an EV, it's $1.13. And then he said, okay, what percentage of people, own, rent, ICE, EV, etc., and then that blended together, he gets 88 cents. So, as we discussed recently, the TLC, Uber, Lyft, and other industry stakeholders will debate these estimates, and that's fair enough. For example, Uber argues that Parrott makes incorrect assumptions about depreciation, which causes the TLC to overestimate the per mile cost. So this was, again, I'm trying to keep this super quick. I'm probably not going to reach my goal of 20 minutes, but at least try to stay below 30 minutes. That was we'll provide the links to these articles. This was that whole message related to like Uber sending a message to drivers saying, 2019 and earlier older vehicles are at risk of being deplatformed or deactivated or not dispatched to if TLC pay rules are passed, and people are freaking out. That was actually a negotiating tactic, in our opinion, aimed at preventing the regulator from increasing per mile rates. The TLC the very next day kind of retorted that and said, they're spreading, it's like a back and forth. But that's what that related to. So related to that 2019 point, and it just relates to what do you mean like per mile rate? How does the 2019, what does that all mean? Specifically on this point, if a vehicle is fully depreciated over 5 years instead of, let's say, 7 years, even though many TLC plated vehicles are used for 7 or more years, how do you reconcile that? This is a classic case of academic analysis versus ground reality. As a quick note, you'll see above that Parrott estimates that renting a TLC plated ICE vehicle costs close to 25% more than owning one. However, in his report, he explains that this cost difference largely stems from 21% sales tax on short-term vehicle rentals, higher insurance costs, and a registration rent. And so TLC Chair David Zoe's previous use of the term predatory has now been quantifiably proven misleading. So we're not going to get into that, but there's this whole background. We bring that up again because it's relevant. It's a relevant discussion point related to the release of FHV licenses and the history of how, you might be saying, well, okay, you guys, people who know us, you guys run a fleet. So again, you're bringing this point up. No, it's actually relevant because he used that as the reason to justify the release of FHV licenses. Many driver advocates got behind that talking point and why that was disingenuous and why it had real impacts. And we said that at that time in November, you'll see below, we predicted driver lockouts, 8 months, 6-7 months before they happened. And, we're not wizards from the future that, came back to predict that. It was easy to predict. And so that's the relevant background. So in any case, there's commentary on that. So in any case, it is what it is. You win, you lose some. As many of you know, we have a small fleet, so we do take some offense to Doe's characterization. We don't believe we're predators, and many of our customers share that sentiment. So we do think the point has to be brought up again, honestly, because it was just as Doe is rightfully accusing Uber of spreading somewhat of disinformation. I mean, you could argue that Doe himself was spreading disinformation at that point. Anyways, it happened. And a lawsuit happened, still ongoing. Okay, so that said, we want to help the TLC chair Doe and the drivers build a stronger argument for a higher per mile rate, one that's more difficult for Uber and Lyft to dispute. So Uber is disputing that, okay, you're using 5-year depreciation. After 5 years, you're assuming that a vehicle is not worth anything. But, many drivers drive, year 6, year 7, year 8 on a paid off car. So, Uber can kind of argue that legally. So we're saying there's something that was missed, actually, that is much more defensible that the TLC can use to increase the per mile rate. And I'm actually calling for the increase of the calculation of the per mile rate. And then later on, you'll see net, it'll balance Uber and Lyft's perspective and the TLC's perspective, in our opinion. Okay, so Professor Parrott published a thorough and well-researched report, but we graded a B+. The major oversight that explains this grade and highlights the importance of consulting all industry stakeholders is his omission of the cost and provision of comprehensive collision insurance. As the report mentions, the majority of drivers who own their vehicles finance their purchase with a loan. So that's in his report. When a driver finances a vehicle, the lender almost always requires them to maintain full coverage, which is, auto plus physical damage. For example, if a vehicle is sideswiped while parked or involved in an at-fault accident, the lender needs to ensure its financial interest is protected. Now, we've written about this before. A lot of people play a game where they initially DMV register like the car they buy for TLC use and then cancel that insurance and then put on the TLC plates, and the loan company or insurance company doesn't double check what happened. But for the purpose of the per mile rate calculation, that has to be incorporated, that comprehensive collision, if most people have loans. So given Parrott's appropriate focus on EVs, this is an extremely important yet underreported topic, as we've previously covered. Many NYC TLC focus insurers are unwilling to underwrite comprehensive collision insurance for EVs, especially Teslas, one of the most popular choices among NYC drivers. So anybody with a Tesla Model Y or 3 know there's this crazy policy with a $5,000 deductible. That's not really even an insurance at that point when you have a $5,000 deductible on a vehicle. And so it's just, we've written about this. It's just very hard to get. It's very expensive to get comp and collision insurance for gas cars. And the provision of comp and collision for EVs is not even available. So even if you're willing to pay for it, many people don't even offer the insurance. And this isn't a major oversight by Professor Parrott. So hopefully you can correct it, because it'll help justify and increase the per mile rate. Furthermore, even when an insurance company does offer comprehensive collision policy for an EV, it is often expensive or comes with an unusually high deductible. While Parrott does a solid job analyzing vehicle expenses, including the cost of NYC commercial auto liability, which he estimates correctly, he overlooks this significant expense. Comp and collision insurance typically costs $25,000 to $5,000 per year, depending, it's like percentage of a vehicle's value, depending on the deductible and the vehicle's make and model. This is a noteworthy ongoing expense that could further support the TLC's case for increasing per mile rates. Okay, I'm probably already running, above the 20-minute goal, but let's see if I can get below 30. I'm trying my best. We hope the above provides useful context around the per mile and per minute pay rate debate. Ideally, drivers and other industry stakeholders will advocate for comprehensive collision insurance costs to be incorporated into the per mile rate calculation. It is much more difficult for Uber and Lyft to dispute comp and collision related costs than it is to debate depreciation assumptions. Okay, full circle. Okay, this hearing is about driver pay. Two of the three main factors in driver pay is the per mile rate, per minute rate. And now we went over how, we went over the report where you can find, and we'll provide the links to everything about how this is calculated, how you should think about it, how like the genesis of these metrics, like what is a per mile rate? Like how does one begin to establish where to start? What is a per minute rate? So those are two of the three key metrics that drivers need to think about. And so Parrott basically breaks the per mile rate down in his report. And then we argue, and then, how he comes up with this. And this is what so in the proposed rules, so you see that 0.879, right? So in TLC's proposed rules, if we can find it, 0.879. So, this is how that's working, bridging one to the other. Okay. There's not that much more of the article left. So utilization rate. Okay. This is always the topic that like people get, they just like, fall asleep or they're just overwhelmed by it. So utilization rate is a widely discussed topic and often where people get lost. We want to keep it simple. Yours, how busy a driver is kept by Uber and Lyft. The thinking behind adding a UR to the driver pay formula is you can create strong per mile and per minute pay rate protection, but if a driver is not working enough, then they aren't actually making a living wage. For example, if a minimum driver pay rate solves for $30 per hour, but a driver is only kept busy for 4 of 10 available hours, they probably aren't making $30 per hour. Unless for the 4 hours they're making $75 per hour times 4 divided by 10, technically then yes, on average they'd be making $10 an hour, but you get our point. The per mile and per minute rate factors. So just view this as a per mile rate, but it's factor. The reason it's a factor is they say, okay, that's the per mile rate, and we're going to divide it by how busy a driver is kept. So if you divide 0.88 by a number less than 1, like 58% utilization, 53% utilization, 68.5% utilization, which now they've created another utilization metric just to confuse people more, right? You're going to get a number higher than 0.88, right? If you did 0.879 divided by, 0.58 or 58%, the number is higher, So in every other jurisdiction outside of NYC, we believe utilization rate is an interesting concept for regulation and driver pay protection. So why do we believe NYC does not need a utilization rate? In our opinion, UR is just to be clear, this is our opinion. We think UR is the reason that lockouts occur. There's other reasons, but that's the main reason in our opinion. The city and TLC have the ability to regulate NYC's driver vehicle supply, including yellow cabs. That's why we don't think New York City needs a UR, because the city and the TLC can regulate the for-hire vehicle supply, which is why I brought up that predatory leasing point before and the release of the 10,000. So it's simple. If Uber and Lyft can only dispatch a fixed number of FHVs and drivers, utilization is naturally accounted for, unless the FHV license supply is mismanaged. As we noted earlier regarding 10,000 TLCs being released in a single year. Think about it. When did lockouts start? How did we and others predict they would happen months before they actually did? We're not that smart. The prediction was easy. So November, this is very shortly after they release all those plates, lockout soon, ? We wrote that. Because it was obvious to predict. It's like, it was so obvious to predict. In any case, a more compelling point is that if the TLC strictly manages FHV supply, including taxi medallions, it will ultimately regain the power it has lost to Uber and Lyft. Together, these companies control 80% of the trip market share. Proper FHV supply management would also support the yellow cab sector, which currently has over 3,850 tax medallions sitting in storage, helping it recover. So there's also that problem. You have to, you have to make sure the yellow cab industry recovers. And if you add too many, for hire vehicles, especially yellow cabs can get dispatched by Uber now and other, probably in the future, other e-hail providers like Curb. So they are kind of going after the same trip base in many instances. So that's another consideration related, that needs to be taken into account for. Okay, regarding concerns about drivers being stuck in predatory leasing arrangements, I want to mention that because a lot of people who are watching this will be like, well, you're just talking your own book. You have a fleet company. You're going to benefit from the TLC plates. We have consistently been transparent about that. And we've also proposed. We created our fleet. We created our fleet before the TLC plate cap. That never was even on the radar that a TLC plate cap would exist. And it actually prevented our growth, to tell you the truth. But in any case, we understand the frustration related to someone being stuck in a lease. We've addressed this and multiple solutions to this problem. So we just said there are many other ways the TLC can address this, such as FHV lease cap. So a leasing company has to break down why they're charging what they're charging. Tax medallion is a very similar thing. Or that might not be satisfactory to some drivers, or a managed lottery release of FHV license to long-term renters. So let's say someone's been renting a TLC car from me for like 6 years, and then they tell me like, what, I like you, I've had a good experience. Hopefully they'll say that about me if they've been dealing with me for 6 years. But they're like, I just really want my own car. Can I buy the TLC plate? How do I get it? Okay, for a driver like that, 6 years, whatever, we can all have an industry discussion about what that is. But okay, sure, you can create a mechanism that someone like that can access a TLC plate in their name, not be stuck in a rental arrangement. By the way, the taxi medallion industry will be super against this, just FYI. But I am for that. Let's have a discussion. Let's have the lease caps in the meantime. There's other ways to solve for that legitimate issue. Okay, so for these reasons, we do not believe a utilization rate is necessary in the TLC's driver pay formula. Eliminating its use while appropriately managing an FHV license supply will likely put an end to NYC driver lockouts. So we're saying, okay, here we are right now. We're saying increase the per mile rate, I guess what they call factor, by adding comp and collision. Professor Parrott forgot to add that, which is unfortunate, but he can add that back. So that's one suggestion. Second, which is like Uber and Lyft might be against, and the TLC might be for, and drivers might be for. And then the elimination of the UR, I believe that's pro driver, to be frank. And Uber and Lyft will also be amenable to it. But the TLC, I mean, and we're almost done with the article. Okay. If UR is capped, high volume daily trip threshold needs need to be raised to 100,000. The TLC has been adamant about keeping utilization rate. In fact, they are even proposing to add a second UR metric to the driver pay formula. So they're going to have that's why I don't want to get lost in complicating it. They're going to have like two URs. One is like a distance-based UR, and then a time-based UR, and it's just their complication after complication with this. But I guess they're tripling down on the use of UR. So let's say they don't change UR. We understand that's a possibility. So if they're unwilling to discontinue its use, we believe they should change the definition of high volume for hire services based from 10,000 daily trips to 100,000 daily trips. You might be like, what are you talking about? Remember, all of the driver pay rules mentioned above only apply to Uber and Lyft because they are the only NYC companies that dispatch more than 10,000 daily trips. Now, let's say we launch a new ride-hailing company and starts getting traction. The moment we exceed 10,000 daily trips, there's only like a 1-2% of the market share. We would suddenly be subject to the same driver pay regulations as Uber and Lyft, these gigantic companies. So this is the main reason. Why former 5% market share player ultimately went out of business back in late 2019. So at that time, this is a quote from a Reuters article, Juno's closure in New York City is further evidence that the TLC's approach has created an uneven playing field that reduces choice for riders and drivers. So our point is that, in our opinion, like it wasn't the minimum per mile and per minute rates that put Juno out of business. It was the utilization rate that put Juno out of business, in our opinion. Okay, now we're at the end. So we want to briefly mention that the TLC's new proposal states. So the proposed amendments, this is from the rule hearing. So people will be like, why did you gloss over this? So, in this rule package, I think this is like an interesting excerpt. It says HV companies would be required to provide 72 hours notice to any driver where the company will not permit to log into the application. So 72-hour notice for driver lockout notice, you could say. And then high volume company may not log the drivers off for the next 16 hours except in certain limited circumstances. Okay. I said, the reason we're not spending too much time on this is that we believe abandoning the fundamentally flawed driver pay formula that relies on utilization rate would make such regulatory over-engineering unnecessary. Furthermore, this regulation is likely to create Uber-only and Lyft-only drivers, ultimately eliminating the work when and where you want flexibility that so many drivers value and enjoy. Conclusion, we hope the above summary was helpful. Be sure to check out this video overview of the article on YouTube and our Substack podcast section. Okay, so we'll provide the links to all of these things. So where to find what we're talking about. So if you want to find Professor Parrott's report, go to data and reports. You go to reports, and then Professor's Parrott report is right here. It's very interesting, honestly. I think it's roughly 40-something, 43 PDF pages with appendix, a lot of interesting detail. Okay, if you want to see TLC's new rules, you go to About, go to TLC News, go to Public Notices, uncollapse here, click here. Okay. Obviously, we can get into a lot more detail. If you have questions or comments, like leave them in the Substack, leave them in the YouTube. But we just want to make this as short as possible. I hope I got below 30 minutes. So, we encourage you to testify, sign up to testify at the hearing on Wednesday, and speak to you soon.